Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Spar&Brawl. Hope you're having a decent day. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Sam. And there seems to be some infighting between OPEC members, really two OPEC members who have been extremely close to one another over the past few years, which is Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So based on my understanding of the story, this is the issue. So they had a meeting on Friday. They had a meeting, OPEC plus meeting. So not only the OPEC countries, but other group of oil producing countries led by Russia. And previously, they had agreed to cut down oil production, all the countries, about a year ago. They made this agreement because of the crash and everything that was happening and the pandemic. They had limited all of them that limited their oil production. And now this meeting was about actually gradually increasing the level of oil output. However, they want this current overall framework to be extended beyond its current April 2022 deadline. And this is where the spat comes in, based on my understanding, which is the UAE is very willing to increase. It wants to increase its oil production. However, it's saying that it doesn't agree with the extension of this framework, which nevertheless limits overall. I mean, they're saying that they're being disproportionately, hurt here and limited comparing to the Saudis, especially. They're saying that this is limiting like a third of their production they're not able to tap into, but it's much less for the Saudis. And everybody else has kind of agreed with this, and they're willing to extend the overall framework, even though to allow oil production to go up a bit. But yeah, this led to a meeting ending, I believe, on Friday, and they were supposed to pick it back up on Monday, the meeting, but however, there were no agreements reached during that time. So they decided to completely cancel the Monday meeting, and there hasn't been any date set so far for resuming this meeting. And so the overall conversation is both about this, and the people are also trying to say, well, it's part of an overall pattern of a rift being created between Saudi Arabia and UAE. So before throwing it back to you, Sam, I just wanted to read these three paragraphs from Financial Times. A few years ago, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia went as far as secretly drawing a plan for a political union. While a confederation did not materialize, the Gulf's autocratic states fought rebels in Yemen, stood united in a boycott of Qatar for its alleged support for Islamism. In the past few days, however, cracks in the unity have become apparent as the interests of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi diverge again on issues ranging from oil production, Yemen, normalization with Israel, and the way to handle the pandemic. So kind of giving this picture that the UAE's disagreement here is much more than oil. And in fact, Al Jazeera, just a final thing to add, Al Jazeera had a former researcher from OPEC on, and this gentleman went as far as to say that he thinks it's 60 to 70% political and only 30% about oil. But regardless, those other spats that they're talking about, I feel that if the UAE is being limited in its oil production this much, and it believes so, I think for them, a lot of it is about oil because that's, a main source of their revenue. So yeah, that's where I kind of stand on it. So Sam, I don't know if you want to fill in some of these gaps. And also my question to you is it just about oil, or do you think it's about more?
Look, it's obviously about more, obviously, I think. I personally come from I personally believe in political economy, kind of. So I don't think, just generally speaking, I have a feeling that the division between politics and economy is not useful and harmful in many ways. So no, I don't think it's just about oil. Obviously, yeah, as you mentioned, and a lot of people mentioned, in Yemen, UAE is going its own way. In even in dealing with Iran, they've took a more conciliatory approach earlier than Saudis. However, I don't know. Maybe there are different factions in each government, and each supported by different group and all that. Because for a long time, Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the, I think, heir apparent to the UAE throne, he was seen as the man behind Mohammed bin Salman, or the man who was a mentor to Mohammed bin Salman in many ways. So that's strange. But the OPEC thingy, I think it's a strange that, I mean, it shows fractions within the Arab world, and it shows that the unity there is very fragile, as always. But I mean, highly suggest everybody watching a couple of Bloomberg did a couple of videos on it as well. They did a really good job, experts. And Russia has the same issue with pretty much with Saudi Arabia. They don't want to reduce their production. Iran has problems with its quota, and it wants exemption from reduction because Iran feels, because of sanctions and all that, they couldn't sell and as much, and they lost their market. And by the way, Iran, for example, and well, Russia has many times basically has gone its own way. Iran has said that as soon as the sanctions are lifted, they're gonna return to the same level of production as before sanctions, same level of exports, sorry. So this is a problem pretty much everybody has with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is trying to protect, it seems it's trying to protect American interest, because America, Biden administration, I think, issued a warning to OPEC that, you know, the rising cost will be, because the major issue that gets impacted when there's a, you know, when there's a hike in prices is gas prices in the US, or petrol prices in the US, or globally, but in the US is the most important one. So yeah, so everybody has that problem with Saudi Arabia.
But
and
if they
everybody
increase the
pretty much,
production, the oil prices should go down if they allow more
they,
oil to be produced.
yeah, but they sell more oil.
What do you mean?
And they crush their, well,
Yeah.
they sell more. They sell more volume, so they get more money. They can sell more, basically. They
But
get
I'm
more
saying the
money
price
in
of
short
oil
term.
would go down if Biden's concern is the price of oil going up in the US.
Not,
Restricting the amount of oil that is produced will not help the price go back down.
no, US wants it to be restricted. Russia, Iran, and they all want to, UAE, they all want to
Okay, yeah.
increase production. They want to increase production.
But I'm saying
They
if they sustain the, like, if they don't allow for it to increase, then oil prices will keep on going up rather than going down
Why?
because there's
It went
less oil
down
on the
just
market.
because there were, what? No. Why?
Yeah,
Why?
because,
No.
I mean, there's
Whenever
less oil.
there is fraction within OPEC, like the oil prices went down when there was fraction within OPEC.
I know, but I'm saying
or if
overall.
UAE worst.
But I mean, the whole idea behind limiting oil prices, right, was to make sure that the price just doesn't drop into something very
Limiting
low.
production.
Limiting production, exactly. That's the overall idea, right, behind limiting production, to maintain the price of oil when demand isn't that high because of the pandemic and everything last year.
That's part of it, yeah. But there's also the whole thing that they, you know, gas and petrol prices and the shell companies in the US, they wanted to, at the same time, they wanted to keep the prices up, but they don't want to push them too high, because even I think at $75, I think they still can have a market within the US or something. So they, at the same time, you want to crush them.
Yeah.
So it's a bit, yeah, weird. But yes, you're right that the framework was designed to limit production because oil prices plummeted to minus, basically.
Yeah. But you're right that for the US oil, for US shell oil, they need prices to be a little bit high for it to be profitable. So you're definitely right on that point.
And by the way, I mean, you mentioned Corona, but the oil crisis last year, I think it didn't start because of Corona. It started before Corona even hit, and I think it was largely because US basically overbought. The oil prices were historically low. They bought oil and they stored them, and then because of that, it went even further low, and then there was no storage. It's crazy. So yeah, we have to do maybe a big breakdown. But in this specific case, it was strange that UAE came out and said it, and it does show the political frictions within the countries. But they're both such close countries, you don't know if they're different factions or if they're unified and stuff. It was strange that UAE said it, but I think a lot of other countries will also have the same issue with Saudi Arabia. And to be honest, to be fair to Saudi Arabia, a lot of countries don't follow the like a lot of African countries, especially, that there is not much oversight, and like the country is under a lot of pressure, they don't follow these guidelines, and then Saudis cut from their own production to make up for that a lot of times. So to be fair.
Yeah. Okay. And then, okay, so and anybody, please, if there's anything you want to add, comments, criticisms, questions, please do so in the comment section below. We'll make sure to get to them. And I just wanted to add a little final part from what I've come across. So again, from the Financial Times article, they're saying that insiders say debate has been raging in Abu Dhabi at the highest levels of the national oil company about whether to leave the oil cartel. So to completely leave it, a departure will allow the UAE to fund plans to diversify the economy from refinery and petrochemicals production to a newly formed commodities exchange and its own crude benchmark that requires access to volume to make it a success. So maybe they're even considering to leave OPEC Plus. And in 2019, Qatar actually, sorry, leave OPEC. And in 2019, that's when Qatar actually left OPEC. So they're not being restrained by any of the agreements, if I understand correctly, happening with OPEC.
To be fair, I personally, as an Iranian, I at least always felt that just Iran should leave OPEC, because first of all, Iran is one of the countries that has, in my view, been most damaged by OPEC. But at any rate, I think it's a useless organization, bunch of cronies, and it's a useless bureaucracy, really, because every country does what they want in the end, it seems. Some of them out of necessity, some of them because they can. So it's a pointless organization completely since 1970s. I think it's been pointless. Like even then in 1970s, when there were, or 1960s, or whenever there was that war, like Arab countries boycotted Western, and but Libya and Iran did. It's idiotic. And now you have Venezuela. There's just too many oil producers now. So I don't understand why. I mean, I understand because it benefits their bureaucratic, and I especially hate the Iranian officials' approach, like the Iranian oil minister for oil, Bijan Zangian, who's considered one of the top technocrats. He's like, oh, we want, just a slightly bit better quota, like in our negotiations. Just I prefer like just leave if I were UAE or if I were anybody else, I would leave this organization. Like I think it's in the national interest of my country.
But I'm guessing it was quite beneficial over the past few decades from the Saudis' point of view, no? Because I mean, they probably had good control over everybody and people had to follow him. The same researcher from OPEC who was on Al Jazeera said during his time, and of course, this is not surprising, there were no rifts. Anything that the Saudis said, everybody kind of fell in line and agreed. And even now, it's only the UAE really.
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, yeah, I agree. OPEC as a whole, he says OPEC has been disciplined, very disciplined, and I agree with that. OPEC as a whole been very disciplined, but internally, not really. Like nobody listens to Saudi Arabia unless they're paid, and they do their own oil thingies, and Russia is doing its own thing, and it's obviously it's been good for some of the bigger countries. But and Saudis, that's the thing. Yeah, Saudis are trying to control more of the market through OPEC. But I mean, it's a cartel. But it's but it's very unsuccessful. Like as in, like it seems like everybody's doing their own thing. So I'm just saying that it seems like a really useless organization, even more useless than UN and EU and all that, like really pathetically. Like they just have meetings and nobody agrees, and then they agree, but then they do their own thing. So
okay, all right. So let's leave this there. And if anybody would like to add anything, comments, question, criticism, like I said, please leave them in the comment section below. We'll make sure to get to them. But if not, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video. Thank you.